Trisha, I'll let you give me the cue to get started.
Please go ahead, Alex. Thank you.
Great. All right, good morning, everyone. For me, good morning from Washington, D.C. I'm Alex Niedermeyer, and I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping things for the call today. So first of all participants, attendees, when you come into the Zoom session, you are muted, but we encourage you to interact with the panelists and with the moderator in a couple of other ways. So we have two different ways to speak with them. One is through the Q&A. So you have a button probably at the top of the screen, depending on how your layout is, that you can send questions to the panelists and then get a response in real time through like a text message, or we can answer them live or at the end of the session. So please use that Q&A button for any specific questions you have for moderators. And then separately, we have the chat feature, and please introduce yourself and share any commentary or thoughts and that sort of thing, but do save your questions for the Q&A so that we'll have a good record of those at the end, and that makes it a little easier for us to go through them. And then finally, you have a little bit of an ability to change your view, to change how you see the speakers today, so you can adjust those settings if you'd like to. And then finally, not on here, I do want to note that, of course, with COVID-19 and the pandemic, if you are viewing this conference with other people that are not in your pod, we do ask that you use your mask and be safe and stay healthy. So with that, I will hand it over to our moderator.
Great, thanks, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Integrated Land and Resource Governance Annual Symposium. My name is Patricia Mupeta-Muyamwa. I will be your moderator. I work with the Nature Conservancy Africa program, and I'm the Director of Strategy for Africa Indigenous Landscapes work in East and Southern Africa. And one of our programs is in Zambia around the Kafue National Park. So I will moderate today's session. We had our first session yesterday, and we had some really great presentations and some really good deep dive on Q&A, and we hope today will be the same. And so in terms of our plan for today, we will have 5 presenters. I will introduce each presenter at the beginning of their presentation. They have a 15-minute slot where they will present. And then we will leave the last 45 minutes for Q&A. So please kindly take note of your question for the particular presenter. And as Alex shared, please put your questions in the Q&A. It's easier for us to get to them and make sure that they are addressed by the presenters. So I think with that, I will introduce the first presenter. So today's first presentation will be made by Helen Nanskombi. Helen is a research scientist with the Thunen Institute of International Forestry and Forest Economics in Hamburg, Germany. Helen is also pursuing a PhD in forest sciences at the Thunen Institute in Munich, Germany. And her research focuses on forest governance and its effect on land use change in the tropics, including Zambia. Her presentation today is titled, Can de facto governance influence deforestation drivers in the Miombo woodland? Helen, it's over to you. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's a great privilege and honor to share with you part of our work. The study is part of a research project, Landscape Forestry in the Tropics, and it's funded by the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, conducted by the Thunen Institute of International Forestry and Forest Economics that is based in Hamburg, Germany, but also in close partnership with the Center for International Forest Research in Zambia and the Copperbelt University of Zambia. So the question that we ask here in our study is, can de facto governance influence deforestation drivers in the Zambian Miombo? And we try to find this out as we go ahead. Next slide, please. To give you a brief background, when we look at the problem of deforestation, we know that it's very high, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, as this region has reported the highest rate globally at about 3.9 million hectares per year for the period between 2010 and 2020. And we know that also deforestation is a threat to ecosystem functioning and well-being of millions of human beings who depend on the forests for their livelihood. So the direct causes or the proximate causes are agricultural expansion, wood extraction, and infrastructure development. And the indirect causes are population density or population growth, economic, technological, governance, and sociocultural factors. In sub-Saharan Africa, the driver that is mostly emphasized, that is the indirect or the underlying driver, is population growth or population density. And that's mainly because it's linked to the increased demand for agriculture and forest products. Also equally emphasized is forest governance, as it has been linked to the detected forest loss in 90% of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are undergoing the REDD+ readiness phase, Zambia included. And accordingly, there have been demands for improved forest governance solutions also in Zambia. But the key challenge is the identification or understanding the specific aspects of forest governance that can successfully halt deforestation, especially at the level of implementation, as most of the studies have focused at the legal level, focusing on what is stipulated in the laws. So it's this gap that we try to address in our study, where we focus on understanding the specific aspects of governance that can effectively address deforestation. Next slide, please. But before we go into the details, I'll give you a brief overview of what constitutes forest governance and how is its relationship with deforestation hypothesized or posted in theory. If we look at the bottom box, we see that forest governance, like I already highlighted, is an indirect or underlying driver. It comprises the institutions or actors, could be central government, local government. In Zambia, customary government is very fundamental, that take part in forest management. And then we also have the rules, formal rules, customary rules, rules on use restrictions and conservation, and as well rules on tenure rights and recognition and protection of people's rights. We also have other aspects to deal with land use planning and participatory policy making that here we call our interactions. And these aspects together influence deforestation through their effects or by regulating the human activities that we see in the top box to deal with wood extraction, that is timber, charcoal poles, and firewood, to deal with infrastructure extension, and also to deal with agricultural extension, for instance, crop cultivation and livestock rearing. So it's this relationship or it's this effect that we try to explore in our study. But of course, we take into account other drivers that I've already highlighted are very important. The indirect drivers, we see we have demographic factors, economic, social, cultural, and technological factors, and also other factors that act as catalytic processes to affect this relationship. For instance, biophysical factors and slope, for instance, slope and forest area. So it's this relationship that we try to explore in detail in our study. Next slide, please. So why do we focus on Zambia? Zambia is one of the countries that is experiencing increasing deforestation rates. We know that from between 2000 and 2009, we had about 0.2% deforestation rate. But as we progressed along from around 2010 to 2018, the rate increased to about 0.5. So clearly there's a problem in Zambia. And in Zambia, we focus our study on the Miombo, the major forest type, covering about 45% of the land area. As you can see on the map, all in orange is Central Zambesian Miombo, and all in pink is Southern Miombo woodlands. So it constitutes a considerable part of the country. It's a biodiversity hotspot with about 8,500 plant species, 54% of which are endemic. It's also important for carbon sequestration, sequestering about 0.5 to 0.9 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And as well, it's very important for rural livelihoods. From literature, we know that 44% of income is generated from forests, it's forest income. So in Zambia, we focus our study on 3 provinces, that is Copperbelt, Northwestern and Eastern, and all these provinces are covered by the Miombo. If you see on our map, the small red dots show us where these provinces are located in Zambia. And in each of these provinces, we select 8 communities in which we conduct in-depth analysis of the different governance aspects. So the specific questions that we ask in this study is, which are the direct drivers and other factors that influence deforestation rates in the Zambian Miombo? And does governance quality explain deforestation patterns if considered in addition? And if yes, which specific attributes of governance play a significant role? Next slide, please. So Mayor, to give you a brief background on how we conduct the study, our unit of assessment is the forest governance arrangement in Zambia. And we select this because we are interested to capture the variation in key fundamental governance aspects to deal with access and use restrictions, to deal with tenure and administrative institutions. If you look at this table from the top, as you move from the top to the bottom, our arrangements reflect reducing restrictions. For instance, I will not go in detail in this because of time, but if we look at the first arrangements, the restricted state forests, reserves, traditionally restricted communal forests in Zambia, these are the graveyards. And in this arrangement, access and use is restricted. And if you look at the following, the non-restricted communal forests and the non-restricted individual forests here, access and use, that is the subsistence use is non-restricted. It's only when it comes to commercial purposes that you have restrictions. As also, when you look at all these arrangements, you can see if we go to the tenure, you see we have different forms of tenure. We have state, customary, and if we go to the administrative institutions, we see in some cases we have forest department and traditional institutions. So we try to have all this captured in our study. So how do we collect data? We start with the participatory mapping exercise. If you see the picture in the right corner, they map out the polygons of the different governance structures or governance arrangements in their community, and as well map out the boundaries of their community. Then for each governance arrangement, we assess the quality of forest governance, focusing on the rules and institutions, and also assess forest use within their different land use patches in the governance arrangements. And then if you see that picture below it, we digitize this image and as well calculate the deforestation rate within the different polygons, the road density, the population dynamics, so that we obtain a comprehensive picture of our analysis. Next slide, please. So to give you a brief overview of our results, I'll start with the forest governance performance, which we, like I mentioned, we are interested to see how this affects the rate of deforestation. If you see in our graph, we see we have aspects on rules, we have aspects on institutions, and we have aspects on the interactions. And that is land use planning and public policy participation. And then we see how the different governance arrangements, that is the restricted state forest reserve, the traditionally restricted communal forests or graveyards, the non-restricted communal forests, the non-restricted individual forests, and the forest with overlapping community claims. We found this forest with overlapping community claims as well very interesting because this is not provided for by the law. But when we are mapping out, we find that 2 communities claim a certain area that it belongs to their community. And this area has also been claimed by a neighboring community. So we found this very interesting, especially to see if there's higher deforestation here or not, if this has an impact on the rate of deforestation. So if we look at our scale, we see from 0, it means non-existing, and then 5 is very high. So from this analysis, we find that generally forest governance performance is low across all arrangements. Only aspects of tenure rights recognition and protection score above the average, which is 3, but most of them are scoring below the average. So this has implications for Zambia's forest sector, because governance, like I highlighted already, is interlinked with the growing deforestation rates. Next slide, please. So another key result, now here we try to link the governance quality that we've assessed in the previous slide to the deforestation rate. But of course, like I highlighted, we are also interested to find the effect of the direct drivers or the proximate drivers of deforestation. We have 2 models, model 1, where no governance is considered, and model 2, in which we consider governance. So in the first question, where we focus on identifying the direct drivers of deforestation, we see that in both models, we have 3 direct drivers that are significant. The most prominent driver is area under crop agriculture, which shows a positive relationship with deforestation. The higher the area under crop agriculture, the higher the rate of deforestation. And this is similar to what has been reported elsewhere in Zambia. We know that from our discussions with the local people, they emphasize that diminishing soil fertility and associated reduction in crop yield is what forces them to abandon their crop area and open up new areas for agriculture. So, but we know that also agriculture is very important for food security and for the economy of Zambia. So with this, our results imply the necessity to design sustainable agriculture intensification systems to ensure that people don't have to keep on opening up new areas to carry out crop cultivation. And then the other driver that we found prominent was charcoal production. We saw that it also, similar to crop agriculture, it has a positive relationship with deforestation. The higher the charcoal production, the higher the rate of deforestation. And this is still understandable because, especially in the urban areas in Zambia, most people are relying on charcoal as their main source of energy. So here, because it has been emphasized that Miombo has a high regenerating ability, this result, as much as it's showing this challenging aspect for deforestation, presents a potential for designing sustainable charcoal production system, building on the fact that our Miombo forest could regenerate. And then another interesting result was about the distance to the roads. We also found that the closer to the roads, the higher the rate of deforestation. But we also know that roads are inevitable for economic growth or for a country, especially as they increase rural connectivity or connectivity to specific areas. So here our research emphasizes the need to increase monitoring, especially in forest areas that are close to roads. When we look at our 2 models, the second aspect, we wanted to see that, okay, governance is emphasized to address deforestation through its effect on the indirect drivers. So we try to see, okay, in the second model, what happens when we include governance as part of the study. So when we look at our model, if you look at the adjusted R squared, we see that the model with governance improves slightly in explaining deforestation, but it's not very significant improvement. So it still highlights that, yes, governance plays a role, but mostly it's the direct or the proximate drivers of deforestation that I highlighted, that is to deal with crop agriculture, charcoal production, and distance to roads that are explaining most of the deforestation. So this has implications for measures such as RED Plus that try to emphasize governance improvement. Yes, this is very important, but they should also take into account the fact that the proximate or direct drivers are also significant. So they emphasize that importance of sustainable production systems, and as well the importance of sustainable agriculture intensification. So we see that also when we have governance, the proximate drivers remain significant in our analysis. And this is also shows that, yes, governance should play a role, but the quality is quite low in Zambia. So necessitates improvement before the proximate drivers can address deforestation. To end the results, one very interesting aspect from our analysis is that the traditional institutions and the local institutions, the local government institutions seem to reduce deforestation in the Zambia's Miombo. And we know that Zambia has decentralized its forest sector. So this shows significant potential for addressing deforestation through decentralization, effective decentralization. So to conclude from our policy implications, I will not go in detail because I've already highlighted them already. Proximate drivers have stronger effect on deforestation than governance. These are the direct drivers. And here we emphasize measures to specifically target the direct drivers, that is to deal with sustainable production systems, alternative livelihood opportunities, and incentives. Then also we see that proximate drivers seem hardly affected by the weak governance, implying the necessity for governance improvement. We also highlighted that we have lower deforestation in areas with more effective and better capacitated local government institutions, which indicates the potential to address deforestation through effective decentralization. We saw one result that customary institutions seem to excavate deforestation, probably due to their institutional mandate and preference for agriculture over forestry. Here, because we know that customary institutions is a fundamental structure in Zambia, we recommend for participatory planning processes, land use planning for effective allocation of land, but also to aspects to do with accountability, to hold them accountable would help to ensure that they are allocating land effectively. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Helen. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very well articulated and some really good lessons on forest governance, but also really digging deep into an important aspect on the institutions that are driving deforestation as well as the drivers. For those that I see there's a few folks that have joined since we started, welcome. My name is Patricia and I will be the moderator for this session for today for our natural resource management session. If you have questions for any of the presenters, please keep a note of them, and at the end of all the presentations, we will do a Q&A. Thank you. I'm going to introduce the next presenter. Our next presenter is Kaluba Mwandezi. Kaluba Mwandezi is a senior partner at Sarko's Urban Developers, a planning firm. He has worked as district planning officer at Kalumbila Town Council and Kasempa Town Council, where he was involved in the implementation of district development plans and programs. He also worked as town planner at the Kasempa Town Council and a project manager at the Decentralized Forests and Other Natural Resource Management Program in Kasempa. Kaluba's presentation is titled The Significance of Devolved Rights in Sustainable Natural Resource Management, a reflection on the DFNRMP project. Welcome, Kaluba. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Good afternoon, everyone. Of course, my presentation is on the significance of the devolved rights in sustainable natural resource management, and it's a reflection on the decentralized forest and other natural resources management program. This was a program that was implemented in 6 districts in Zambia, which is Kasempa, Mwinilunga, Ikelenge of the Northwestern Province, and then we had Chinsali, Shwangandu, and Nakonde in Muchinga Province. So the main focus of the program was to achieve poverty alleviation through the use of natural resources, and also through ensuring that the local communities well empowered with the functions and the rights to manage these natural resources. It was a pilot project and it ran for 3 years. And of course, we had overwhelming results, which we felt that should be at least reapplied in other regions, such as, of course, in Eastern Province, there are some programs which are focused on the same principles the GFNRMP focused on. So in my presentation, of course, we're trying to realize that essentially our country is a rich country and endowed with a wide range of natural resources. And of course, this is the reason why we have Zambia as a better spot for investment by foreign or local investors. And this is also enticed by the good policies and laws which have been put in place by the government. And the only the challenge that we've come to realize, of course, during implementation of various activities and programs is the poor dissemination of these policies and laws to the local levels, the grassroots, which is when you talk of the local level, you're not talking about the district level governance, but you're trying to talk about the communities themselves who are actually in the proximity of these natural resources and who can be able to manage them efficiently, as opposed to the national level governance and district level or the provincial level governance systems. So the failure to interpret the legal environment by the local indigenous people often leads to abuse and illegalities, because they do not really realize that they have the right to derive benefit from these natural resources through sustainable use. I would give an example of charcoal burning, for instance. Of course, the indigenous people do realize that they can actually use firewood at domestic level, but of course, when it comes to charcoal burning, they don't know how effectively or efficiently they can actually participate in order for them to derive commercial benefits and to sustain their livelihood. So there are ways, of course, I've heard other presenters touching on a few models that can actually be appreciated to make sure that people are not deprived of this resource. And we're talking about the urban setup. I think most of it being dependent on charcoal, for instance. But what we need to focus on is what other interventions can be put in place in order to support the livelihood of the indigenous people, and then empower them in terms of the natural resource management activities. I think we can go to the next slide. So basically what we're trying to say is that the natural resources are usually adequately protected are usually not adequately protected by the local people at the local level. Why? Because they do not have that right, that feeling of ownership. Because when you talk about forests, for instance, there are a lot of things that can be derived from the forests, which the local communities can also benefit from. But because they think the forest officers from the forest department are the ones that are supposed to, to manage the resources, the forest resources, because they think fisheries and livestock is the one that is only mandated to, to take care of the rivers and the fish stocks that are there, or the aquaculture that can be appreciated from such natural resources. Because there is a feeling of National Parks and Wildlife Department are the only ones that can be, that are mandated to protect and to take care of the natural resources to do with wildlife. So to them, the only way they can enjoy these resources is by is by illegal activities, illegal interventions like poaching, illegal fishing activities and methods. You know, even when they are trying to naturally just derive some benefit from a local forest, they think they are stealing from their own resources. This is why we're trying to, I think the decentralized forest and natural resources management program focused on some institutions that are supposed to be established at community level that are supposed to empower the local or the indigenous people in order for them to manage the resources that they live around, you know, with. In the Forest Act number 4 of 2015, they advocate for the community forest management groups. These are the groups that are mandated to, you know, to identify a certain area and can actually acquire it as a community forest. And this is a group that is supposed to oversee not only the forest products, but also other natural resources that are endowed within that forest, identified as a community forest. So that institution, for instance, will give the mandate, the rights and the functions to the indigenous people, and then they'll begin to appreciate that they need to derive benefit from these resources and they're going to manage them effectively. I think this research is basically surrounding the principles of decentralization in terms of sustainable natural resource management. So this, if we look in the new Local Government Act, we are talking about the World Development Committees, which of course at local level has specific functions that are going to assist the sustainable management of natural resources. A practical example that is being focused here as a case study is Zambezi district, because we have been doing an integrated development plan there, and we understand a bit of some dynamics in that locality. So Zambezi, if you can see from the map on your right hand side, if you're facing your screen, that is Zambezi West, and you can tell that the forestation there is very weak. I think there's a lot of deforestation. I think basically it's because of the natural the physical environment which is there. The area is sandy, and it has less vegetation than the other bank, which is called the East Bank, because in Zambezi there are two sides cut by the Zambezi River, the West Bank and the East Bank. If you look at the East Bank, the deforestation is very, very overwhelming, with just a few spots where you can tell that there's a bit of deforestation there. So now, in Zambezi, for instance, you will find that there are two extremes, the West Bank and the East Bank. And then there are two extremes, for instance, in terms of the forest, the forest and other natural resources management. The other chiefdom who advocates is advocating for cultivation of timber, and then the other chiefdom is also advocating for non-participatory harvesting of timber. So these people on the other side are complaining to say, why is this activity just restricted to a certain, set of people? And then on the other side, there is completely no activity in terms of harvesting of timber. So these two extremes are now trying to give us a scenario of how best can people actually derive benefit from these natural resources without having to anticipate, negative effects like deforestation. Because, for instance, in the program we implemented some 2-3 years ago, the DFNR MP, when you take the participatory landscape approach, a certain area can actually be demarcated in terms of cycles. So timber can be harvested in one area while the other area is being regenerated. And then in the forest, it's not just timber, of course, that you derive benefit from, because there are a lot of other natural resources like rivers. Rivers will also give people some sort of livelihoods, fishing, for instance, and so on. We also have other forest products that you can derive from the forest. There's mushrooms, there's caterpillar. It's not just timber. There's honey harvesting, beehives, and so on and so forth. So the policies that we have are the ones that we need to actually disseminate properly to the local communities, so that they can appreciate that it's not stealing, but if they can use the natural resources sustainably, they can actually derive benefit for their livelihoods and also for commercial purposes, but also managing the forest adequately. There are a lot of resources. For instance, in Zambezi on the West Bank, you find that community members or indigenous people complain that there's literally no activity in terms of livelihood activities, because one of the major activities you may find in a rural setup like Zambezi is, of course, agriculture that can sustain people's livelihoods. But agriculture in Zambezi, the West Bank of Zambezi, is not adequately supported because of the physical environment, the sandy soils which are there. It's very difficult for someone to cultivate, and during the rain season, the whole area is flooded. So if we properly disseminate the information that we have and establish these institutions like the ward development committees, the community forest management groups, and so on, people can begin to realize that it's not just timber, or it's not just fish, it's not just, but they can actually sustainably and manage their natural resources, and also ensure that there's some sort of integration, because that sand which they have in the West Bank is a raw material in some other activities. For instance, it is silica in some mining activities. So why not see how best we can actually manage these resources and derive benefit from them at the same time? Maybe I can just jump to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So what is the rationale of this study? We're trying to look at the flow of activities and see how best this flow can actually, okay. All right, I can see I only have a minute left there. So when we talk about policy and law, which is of course trying to empower people in terms of how they can derive benefit from the natural resources, and at the same time manage them sustainably. We don't have, yes, we can have the laws and the policies, but we have to interpret them and disseminate them adequately to everyone, especially people at the local level, because these are the people that are actually living with these natural resources. So if this information can be properly disseminated and interpreted to the lowest level, to the grassroots, then we can see people trying to appreciate the natural resources which they have and manage them sustainably. Because the policy is actually what gives the people at the local level the rights and the functions that they can, the rights and the function that they can employ in terms of sustainably managing the natural resources that they have. So these devolved rights and functions will then empower them, and then they'll have the sense of ownership, and the functions which are given to them become incentives, in some way, because one great philosopher said, a common good has the less care bestowed upon it. So if people know that this is a protected area, it is our area, we can derive benefit from it, then that becomes an incentive for them to actually care and protect for that resource. And at the same time, it will provide equal opportunity to everyone, and benefit sharing will be there. But what is important, again, in terms of natural resource management is not only how they derive benefit, but how do they add value so that they don't keep on exploiting that resource. And then we have, in that cycle, of course, we need to have monitoring and evaluation aspect. I think this is the biggest thing which is missed in terms of the management of the decentralized forest and other natural resources management program. And maybe I can just wrap up. I have, okay, thank you. So in conclusion, we are saying that, of course, forests and forest products, as well as minerals, are all at risk of depletion. So of course, there is need for the sustainable management of these resources, and indigenous people must always be consulted when giving out licenses, for instance, for mining or concession licenses for timber, because most of the time they see these investors on ground without having consent from them. And even if decentralization may prove difficult at national level, I think at district level, it must be made possible at the local level, at the grassroots, so that people can actually manage the natural resources adequately and sustainably. And I think with those few remarks, I need to conclude my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity. Madam Patricia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kaluba. Thank you for sharing the case study of Zambezi and the factors that are driving some of these changes. It was good to look at a case study from the overview that we got on forest governance from Helen. I think this was a good segue. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is Emmanuel Chipasa Chiwesa-Kunda. Emmanuel is German-Zambian, and he has a career spanning 20 years as a strategic advisor covering process, product, and people. Today, he is serving as CEO of Plant a Million Zambia, developing African solutions for African challenges after completing his sports career as a member of the German Olympic team. That's an incredibly change and a shift, Emmanuel. We welcome you to the session. Emmanuel's presentation is Trees, Power to Transform Livelihoods Sustainable. Thank you. Over to you.
Patricia, thank you very much. Thanks to all participants for tuning in today's session. On the first page, I have to quickly say thank you to a lot of partners we work with whom our work would not be possible. Mainly Musica Development Initiative. Then we have the European Union. Then we have United Nations Convention for Combat Desertification. And we are also a proud member of the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy and the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And today I clearly want to make the case, trees have the power to transform livelihoods sustainable and should be considered much stronger in all the developments around land and resource management. Next, please. Why act now? I think we had Helen mention the percentage number of 0.54 deforestation rate over the last decade, but what does it mean? In figures, we're talking of 100 million trees which are cut every year, and in most cases gone forever. So it's important for us to make sure that tree cutting, which is mainly driven by firewood, charcoal production, impacts several levels. Not only are the trees gone, certain tree species dying out, but also water bodies which are depleting and biodiversity which is being lost, impacting people by having no water, no food, and also no feed for their animals. Next. What is Plant a Million? This is just a quick page to explain our activities, which is centered around the 3E concept, which we are using, which is a holistic approach. The first pillar of our work is centered around education. We have to actually train our next generation, our children. And what Plant a Million has done here, also together with WWF Zambia, is develop school books from grade 1 to grade 2, which focus on climate change. So this is unique in the sense that there's no other country in the world which has climate change books from grade 1 to grade 12. And we're really proud and hope that in 2021, the government will fully adapt it and roll it out to as many of the 4.5 million children which we have in Zambia. We've also in our work set up over 30 nurseries at schools to give children also the practical skills. So theory is important, but also practical skills where we trained children on how to identify, generate compost, identify viable seeds for trees, as well as then growing them and nurturing them before they're planted out, and afterwards also the pruning and aftercare of the trees. Which is the first pillar. The second pillar, which we're not touching today, is also our ecology arm, where for us it's all centered around water, as we believe water is life, important for drinking, important for energy, and also important for agriculture. So what we've done in the last season is plant indigenous trees at the Zambezi source with the National Heritage Conservation Commission, and we plan to do more this year, where we believe practical just plant trees is as simple as that. Our second pillar, economy, is what I'm focusing on today and trying to make the case that trees can transform lives and should be considered much, much stronger in any intervention. What I've brought with me is a case study which we did in the Kaiser Transfrontier area, spanning 520,000, and we looked at certain communities. And what you see here is a slide where we are comparing different crop types, namely maize, cassava, rice, vegetables, and legumes. And on the left side, you see the analysis we did and some detailed data which we had on the communities, which is one, the area planted, the target yield of the specific crop, the harvest, which is then available for sale, and then potential uptakers for the produce, and also estimated price in US dollar per metric ton, and the estimated revenue the community we're looking at could be deriving from that specific crop. The interesting part is at the bottom. What is now, if you normalize it to per hectare land, what's the potential revenue of the different crops, which gives you like an indication how attractive is a certain crop versus another. And if you look at the stable food, which most of the farmers are growing today, maize is at approximately 480 US dollar. It's important to keep some of the figures in mind as we then put it in relation to trees. Cassava is slightly less interesting from a revenue perspective with 450 US dollar, rice at 350 US dollar, and clearly the most attractive and interesting things to look at is one, vegetables, but also legumes, which provides an estimated revenue per hectare of approximately 2,400 US dollar, which is a rough indication message. Among the common crops which we have, farmers should be encouraged to look stronger into the vegetable side and stronger into legumes, which offer definitely interesting revenue perspective, and slightly and slowly move away, diversify from the traditional crop maize, which they're mainly growing today. If we go to the next slide, so we not only looked at crops grown at farmers, but then also looked on the livestock side and said, if you take beef, dairy, cattle as the first category, secondly, game, meat, pig meat, goat meat, and poultry meats, where we looked at the size of the herds. On the left side of the table, the grazing area required, for example, for beef, we're looking at 6 hectares per head. Again, typically on average at 1 hectare per head, and so on. We looked then at the production output with the assumption on the slaughter ratio, potential uptakers again, the price per US dollar which could be fetched per head as in per kilogram, and the potential revenue each of those 5 options would give. And the interesting bit is at the bottom again. If you look now at the revenue normalized on 1 hectare, beef, dairy, cattle in terms of revenue per hectare is at $16 US. If you remember back on the crops, it's much less. So your yield, potential revenue income per hectare on beef or beef or cattle is relatively low. Game is slightly more attractive with $32 US. Pigs is very interesting when you normalize it to 1 hectare, keeping in mind that the feed for the pigs have to be planted and then provided. So we've factored that in on the feed weight ratio. Goats, compared to game or beef, looks more attractive for the Zambian market, and also poultry among the livestock seems here to have the biggest attraction with $2,900 normalized on 1 hectare. If we then go to the next page, what's the case now for trees, and why do we believe at Plant a Million that it has the power to transform livelihoods? We've brought with you the case study of orange trees. And if you assume that you have 100 trees per hectare, you plant every year 52 trees and nurture them accordingly with all the means needed and efforts. And we've put this in front of some of the school children. That's why in the table where you read trees, grade 1 to grade 12, I was emphasizing what the potential could be, and actually teaching children that money is to be made in tree growing. In the middle section, you see the yield assumptions in terms of how many kilograms of oranges do you have per tree, increasing from 0 kilogram to 200 kilogram once the orange trees are mature. And we've used assumption in terms of what's the price you can fetch in terms of kwacha per kilogram. And if you go into the supermarkets, you will see that actually the current orange price is higher. The interesting bit is then at the bottom again. What does it mean in terms of revenue per hectare? And based on the number of trees coming on board every year, your revenue increases from 188 in year 2 to the far right of the table in year 12, where the potential revenue you could be making with orange plantation is over $8,000. If you compare it to the first set of crops, where we had 2,500 with the legnums as the highest. If you then compare it also to the livestock side, where chicken poultry had the highest with 2,900, you see that the potential in the case for trees to empower livelihoods is very important and should be considered in most interventions as much as possible. And clearly, trees have a huge potential to transform livelihoods and should be considered much more when it comes to interventions in Zambia. Next page. We at Plant a Million also believe, yes, trees are important and need to be considered much stronger, but also the landscape and use of technologies has to be dramatically incorporated and enhanced. And on the left side, you see, yes, it has a direct impact on the business, conservation farming and ecotourism, but also has spillover effects, benefits for other areas such as health, wash, ICT, energy, water, education and training and recycling. And in the middle block, you see the technologies we have looked at, which is one, blockchain, artificial intelligence, satellite and sensors, but also nanotechnology, Internet of Things, 3D printers, big data, and drones, where we believe getting strategic partners such as Cisco, Google, or Microsoft on board would be key and essential, beside the cooperations with universities or innovation centers. And on the right side, you see like a snapshot of what applications can you actually be using, when you look at the different technologies. And blockchain, for example, can be used to support farming equipment sharing, so that there's a clear sharing arrangement by using blockchains. And we have in Wapula province, the first company using a blockchain system, but also artificial intelligence could be used, for example, to search processes for potential tourists. Sensors could be used for soil temperature, nutrients measurement, nanotechnology, for night vision glasses, Internet of Things, for national park booking platforms, 3D printing for spare parts for agriculture equipment, big data for farming precision, and drones, of course, for monitoring or impressions of tourism hotspots marketing. And I'm coming towards the end, and key message for future interventions, but also lessons learned in going forward. By comparing different models, our view at Plantimillion is the vision defines the limit. And I've brought here, 3 examples. One is Agdefco, which operates in Zambia with 14,000 farmers. I heard yesterday from Marco, which have a farmer base of 180,000 and potential impact on people. At the moment, 30,000 farmers. And we took here old revenue figures of roughly $3 to $5 million. And the interesting part is in China, which has on the ground a farmer network of 1 million farmers, which are generating $300 million in trade. In this case, with fish farming, there's huge Chinese investors actually investing $1 billion into the system. They have over 850 traders which are connected, and are planning to expand their sales into the international markets. So the clear message on this page is the vision defines the limits. And looking at the Zambian setup and land resource management, we have to get to a level where we start visioning to impact millions of farmers to actually have an overall impact. Next. So in a nutshell, we believe trees can transform livelihoods sustainably. And looking at how much trees we've cut over the last decades, the 2 billion trees in Zambia, we need clear action, and hope with the help of the partners here that we can achieve that going forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Some really innovative, outside the box thinking going on, and the model of using education, the economy, and thinking about long-term, how we really address the challenges that Helen spoke about in the first presentation. So I'm sure there'll be some good questions coming forward. Thank you. I'd like to present our next presenter. So our next presenter is Gillian Kabwe. Gillian is trained in forestry and agroforestry, and has over 25 years work experience. She's currently the senior lecturer at the Copperbelt University and has worked for Zambia Forestry College and the World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF. She has undertaken collaborative research, externally funded work from the Tunen Institute. She's worked with FAO, with UNDP, the government of Zambia, and ICRAF, and University of North Carolina, and C4. She's reviewed and published peer-reviewed journals. Gillian's presentation is titled, Does Nature of Governance Improve Forest Conservation in Zambia and Miombo? Welcome, Gillian, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Welcome everyone who's listening to this presentation. I'm honored to make a presentation on behalf of the other authors that you see in the presentation there, and also to just acknowledge the funding that we received from Tunen Institute that we were implementing the Laforate project for. in Zambia. And I think in the presentation that Helen made, this is just more or less like a complementary presentation. We've got a series of publications from that work that we undertook from 2017 to 2019. Just as has already been mentioned earlier, I think forests are under pressure worldwide, not only in Zambia. We've seen from literature that annually we are losing 7.8 million hectares of forests, and this has led to deforestation and of course forest degradation. So deforestation has so many factors. Helen alluded to these ones, and including, you know, what is common in our country as shifting cultivation, charcoal production, of course minor ones like fuel collection. Most of our people depend on fuels for cooking. And we've also seen that there are so many studies that are trying to understand the extent to which forest fuels contribute to loss of forest in the Miombos. But what is key, I think, in the underlying factors that lead to forest deforestation and degradation is this issue of forest governance. Mostly we say that you know, there's poor forest governance, and everybody looks to the government when we talk about poor forest governance. But it's also important to understand how else forest governance affects deforestation and issues of forest degradation. And we will not be defining these terms of deforestation and forest degradation here because they have widely been explained. But just to mention that forest deforestation has also been linked to this increase in greenhouse gases emissions, loss of functionality of forest ecosystems, and the deterioration of socioeconomic conditions. Most of our people depend on these forests for their livelihood. And the rate at which these forests are said to be lost, I think leaves much to be desired. As you may be aware, more than 160 million households in Africa are said to depend on forests for their everyday living. Therefore, governance becomes important for us to understand the extent to which it might actually be affecting this loss of forests. Governance has been considered as a precondition for sustainable forest management and also for the successful implementation of global initiatives such as REDS, the Forest Landscape Restoration programs. And therefore, it is necessary, if we have to ensure that we continue having our forests, we have to also understand the aspects of forest governance so that we can know how best to address these issues if we had to improve conservation of forests. And these forests we know are supposed to be contributing to biodiversity in most of the cases. So in order for us to ensure that forest governance assists us in reducing forest loss, we also need to be undertaking various studies for us to unpack that aspect. Helen already mentioned the rate at which Zambia is losing forests. And if you think about that loss between 2000 and 2018 to the magnitude of 0.5%, I think it then raises much concern that eventually we may lose these forests, and we don't want to go back to start at zero when we've got forests that we can actually conserve. Conservation is supposed to be assisted by good governance that need to be put in place. So lots of these forests may already have undermined Zambia's commitments. Each time we attend these international treaties, there are certain commitments that we make, and I think to the Aichi Biodiversity target, we already committed that we were supposed to be helping to reduce the loss of forest by 25% by this year 2020. So it would be good to reflect on how much we have done our government towards that reduction. So if forest governance is a prerequisite for curbing deforestation and forest degradation, and considering that Zambia is also in the readiness phase of REDD+, it is imperative that we explore issues pertaining to forest governance. We need to understand how it affects conservation of forests in Zambia. So in our study, we limited, of course, to understanding how the Miombo woodlands are affected by forest governance issues. And we undertook this study in 3 provinces, which will cover the forest landscape project that we had. And these provinces, maybe if you just go to the next slide for me. Yeah, we went to 3 provinces where we tried to understand the issues of forest governance, quality, and how they affect forest degradation. And in our study, we are using the theoretical framework, which is the governance of forest initiative indicator framework, and which has so many indicators that we can look at. And these indicators each do have these elements that help us to unpack it so that we can apply it to a particular situation that we have at hand, and be able to use that framework in our own local context. So we used 24 communities in these 3 provinces, 2 districts per each province, and I'll be able to explain these as we move forward. Next slide, please. So what you see in the map there is the study area that we had. We had Copper Belt, Eastern and Northwestern provinces. We started with scoping studies where we went to these areas to find out what is on the ground. And also we had wanted to find areas where we could compare between the national forests, which are these forest reserves where there's so much protection as has been provided for in the legal frameworks, and also the customary areas where people can actually go and access and be able to compare the resources. So there were so many indicators that we had that we used in the scoping study that led us to selecting these 2 sites, ensuring that there was a spread between the dry and wet Miombo as well, so that we could see which area was more disadvantaged than the other. So this governance of forest initiative framework is widely used and recommended for forest governance assessment. It has a comprehensive coverage and provides a series of indicators for analyzing different dimensions. And the purpose was to test the applicability of the proposed indicators on the basis of community perceptions. The community perceptions can actually indicate the extent to which governance structures are legitimized by community members themselves. These perceptions, as we know, have also been reported to correlate with local compliance with rules for common pool resource management. And it is also that these community perceptions capture the de facto reality that exists on the ground. There are so many policies and initiatives, and I think you agree with me that Zambia does have good policies, and this we hear in many fora when these presentations are made. And on the first day, I think we also heard from different directorates in the ministries that were looking at many many different disciplines. For example, forestry, we had somebody from lands presenting, and so it shows that in Zambia we do have these important policies and initiatives. Just to mention, for example, the decentralization policy, national RED plus strategy, 7th national development plan, and strategies such as the Convention on Biological Diversity. All these contribute to, the alignment of attainment of the Sustainable National Development Goal 15, which talks about sustainable forest management. We do, even our act and the forest policy now does provide for good governance arrangements. But these may not necessarily be good in themselves if you had to apply them at local level. Yeah, when we sit as technocrats, it's very easy to understand that these policies are good, but how do they feature when we actually go and try to apply them? Let me have the next slide, please. So some of the findings that we had from testing the framework were that we could not find all the indicators that we had in all the areas that we visited. But what was key is that there's very little public participation for the local communities. If you think about public participation in forest policy formulation, you find that there will be elements, this and that went and so on, but is there room for, or a platform to make significant contribution by those people that are on the ground? And I think this was not really coming out as being the case. In the case of gender equity is just one of the elements that we have in the framework. We found that this was actually not significant, and yet it is cardinal in order for forest management to be sustained, especially in communal customary arrangements. We noticed apprehension, compliance, and monitoring of customary law that was significantly lower in the state than customary forests, and this is expected since with state lands we know that there are so many restrictions that apply for people to use them. There's weak enforcement of forest rules, including the bylaws and national statutes that are part of the basket of those underlying drivers of deforestation. So rules are made weak because they are not supported by bylaws and statutes, especially for application at lower level. The statutory enforcement of rules and combined with good institutional capacities is actually likely to produce better governance performance on the ground. And I think if this is improved, we anticipate also that most of our forests will be conserved. Let me have the last slide. I will just conclude by saying that, tenure security, which we did not necessarily find that it was affecting forest governance, but it is actually guaranteed, and it is required for us to have successful forest conservation. There's need, therefore, for us to have to get support for financial and technical institutional capacities that combine the coordination of mechanisms to permit the satisfactory enforcement of forest rules, especially at community levels. We need to ensure that these rules are formalized and that bylaws are also enforced. There's also a need for frequent monitoring, apprehension, and graduated sanctions as part of the rule enforcement procedures. I think just having the rules there is not sufficient if we are not going to be constantly monitoring to ensure that they are contributing to preserving our forests. And maybe just to point you to the fact that it is important that we have capacity building for participatory land use planning and policy. Public policy participation should be enhanced. I would just like to also refer you to the reference that I have provided in this presentation so that you can read and see the extent to which we applied the GRI framework in understanding forest governance issues. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Gillian. Thank you for giving us a deep dive and building on the aspects of forest governance and the impacts on Miombo vegetation. I'm going to move to our last presenter for today. Last but not the least is Chaona Piri. Chaona started her career in conservation 12 years ago, and she's currently working as program manager at Biocarbon Partners, and she's finalizing her PhD. Chaona is a dedicated ornithologist, conservationist, and team leader with an overall goal to influence the sustainable use of ecosystems and the services they provide. A presentation is on eco-charcoal, green energy, conserving forests, and providing rural income through value addition. Welcome, Chaona. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And thank you to USAID for the opportunity. I'm actually so glad to be the last one because I've seen a number of presenters highlighting charcoal production as one of the major drivers of deforestation. And one of the things we are proud of as BCP is that while we've acknowledged charcoal production as one of the major drivers of deforestation, we have actually started to think innovatively of what can be done to make charcoal production not to be seen as something that is always a negative. So the initiative that I'm focusing on is something that we refer to as the Eco Charcoal Initiative. And it's an initiative that we're implementing in Wunda Wunda Chiefdom, here in Lusaka province, where we're working with charcoal producers to encourage them to produce charcoal sustainably. So the first slide is basically what has already been said about Zambia having one of the highest deforestation rates in the world, and charcoal has a substantial contribution to that, where we are losing about 300,000 hectares of forest per year. And this is an issue in the sense that we can see the forest degradation happening, but we can also see that charcoal production is not going anywhere anytime soon. So next slide, please. Our response to this has been to understand what the drivers of charcoal production are. And what we have found out, which also speaks to a number of other publications from institutes like CIFO, for example, is that the demand for charcoal production is high in urban areas, even though this charcoal is produced in the rural areas where it's barely used. So if you go into rural areas, what you find is them using firewood, not in a form of, for lack of a better term, processed as charcoal, but rather as firewood. And then the charcoal that is produced is earmarked for sale in urban areas. And what is driving this demand in urban areas? Obviously, at the moment, we have everyone's story of load shedding. And then also the cost of energy. Even in the absence of load shedding, there are a lot of households in urban areas that are not able to afford to cook on an electric stove or to buy gas, or even just their perception toward gas is that gas is something dangerous, so they still opt for charcoal. And then there's also the cultural aspect of it, where we think that there are some foods that we eat as Zambians. I would single out beans and dry fish, for example, which take hours to cook, and we feel that these things should be cooked on a brazier with charcoal. So if we have all of these needs as Zambians, and charcoal is one of the things that we run to, how can we handle this problem? Also taking into account the fact that rural communities undertake charcoal production to generate some income. So beyond the needs of the urban communities that have cooking and heating needs, the rural communities also raise some income from charcoal production. So our solution to this, next slide, please, has been to not advocate for a ban on charcoal, but advocate for sustainably produced charcoal. And our eco charcoal is an example of sustainably produced charcoal. So the aspect of sustainably produced charcoal does not just lie in the efficiency of kilns, for example. We have a number of studies that show efficient kiln technology options, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But most of these have not been well received at several levels. And this has to do with a lot of parameters. Obviously, it's beyond just communities being able to understand what the differences are between the efficient kilns like the Casamanse kiln that we use for the eco charcoal production against the traditional kiln. But then also to have institutions such as ourselves participate in such initiatives and try to drive the agenda of sustainable charcoal production forward. So on the left of the slide, on the right of the slide is an example of what our eco charcoal bag looks like. And we are proud to actually say that it's available locally in ShopRite. And then also this is just one of the bags that we have. We also have a bigger bag, which weighs about 60 kg or so. And it's available for now in Lusaka because that's where it's produced, but there's plans to expand this to be available in other provinces. Next slide, please. So what makes eco charcoal different from the other types of charcoal? Alex, next slide, please.
I think there's just a little bit of a delay, but it should be showing up for you soon.
Okay, all right, thanks. So I was saying what makes eco charcoal different from the other type of charcoal that is produced in Zambia is that eco charcoal taps into the fast regenerative ability of miombo. So it's produced from miombo wood, and it's designed to be from selective harvesting of community forest. So the people that we work with, who we refer to as chapreneurs, actually get trained by our team and the Department of Forestry in identifying which trees to be cut for charcoal production. So it's selective harvesting of these, and we call the places where they harvest these harvest strips. And these are part of an 18-year rotational forest replenishment program. So miombo regenerates very fast, and we are pegging it at an 18-year rotational program to allow for maximum possible regeneration. And then also the aspect of prescribing a minimum log diameter that can be used for eco charcoal prevents the indiscriminate cutting of trees. So what this is doing in turn is contributing to reducing habitat loss in the Lower Zambezi ecosystem. As I mentioned to start, we are implementing this in the Wunda Chiefdom, which is just outside of the Lower Zambezi National Park, one of our prime national parks in Zambia. So the kilns used are not just efficient in the sense that they burn this longer organization process, because there's the aspect of prescribing log size, there's the aspect of prescribing wood type. Wood moisture contributes to the quality of charcoal produced, and then there's also the aspect of the amount of emissions that are released from that production. So these kilns that are being used result in a product that is not just sustainably produced, but also burns cleaner because of how it's produced. And we are able to confirm that it actually burns 20% longer than the conventional charcoal. In addition to that, because of the scale of investment that's required for using the improved kilns, these kilns are stationary kilns. You can't just make a kiln wherever you find forest. So it means that the chapreneurs need to be able to transport the logs from where they've cut them to the kilns. And that needs some income, some capital to start with. And we are able to ensure that they have that, which also results in sustainable income as we buy this charcoal from them and then have it redistributed in outlets around Lusaka. In addition to that, EcoCharcoal pays all levies and taxes, so it's actually not an illegal product, and it's charcoal that we can all be proud of as Zambians. Next slide, please. So I highlighted a little bit on what the benefits from EcoCharcoal are. It stops deforestation in the sense that it guides which forest can be cut. It guides which size of trees can be cut, and that promotes habitat security because indiscriminate cutting is avoided. Then it also supports local producers. Our approach is to work with existing charcoal burners in these communities, and we train them and then upscale them and call them entrepreneurs. And then also EcoCharcoal is sustainably produced based on the 18-year rotation, the selective harvesting of wood, and then also the restriction on diameter. I mentioned that because of using an improved kiln, it burns much cleaner, so it's very efficient in terms of its carbonization and its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And it burns 20% longer than the normal charcoal because of the nature in which it's produced. And lastly, it's a proudly Zambian product, which actually competes favorably with the imported charcoal that you find in some of the supermarkets. Next slide, please. So to close off, I'll just share a short video from one of our entrepreneurs and her experience on being part of the EcoCharcoal initiative. Yeah, so this was one example from somebody that we work with on the group of entrepreneurs in Bunda Chiefdom, Lusaka province. And one of the key takeaways that I would like to leave with you is that while we might have a number of these beautiful initiatives that look like they can make the future brighter, as long as no organization takes up the lead and champions the initiative and tries to take it down to a scale where it can be adopted by the people that are involved in such practices like charcoal production, the initiatives will not be successful. So it's very imperative that organizations such as ourselves and any other organizations that are working in the conservation sector aim not to just say do not produce charcoal without providing an alternative, but actually look towards providing alternatives, because at the end of the day, the communities in key biodiversity areas or around national parks still need to make a living, and it's not fair to actually expect them to drop all of these livelihood activities without providing sustainable alternatives that actually contribute to their livelihoods and make sense. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hey, thank you very much, Joanna. That was another great presentation, and it touches on one of the drivers, which is charcoal production, as we saw earlier, and the innovative way the biocarbon is working to address this challenge, but also from the producer's side. So I think this gives us a good array of both the challenges, but also the opportunities that are emerging in the field. So thank you. We've got about just under 30 minutes, and I'll ask each of the presenters to please turn on your video so that we can see your lovely faces. And then I am going to start moderating the Q&A. So we've got a number of questions. First in. So the first question is for Helen. Helen, so thanks for the statistical analysis. It is a well thought out research. How were you able to get accurate statistics for the governance variables, i.e. the effectiveness of local government and customary institutions? Was this your own data set?
Okay, thank you very much. As one of my colleagues, Dr. Kabwe has already pointed to this, the details of how we conducted this study. We worked with the Governance of Initiatives Indicator Framework from the World Resource Institute. I did not elucidate this in detail because of the time. And then from this framework, we have a number of indicators. I'll go specifically to the indicators on institutions that the person asking has asked about. And in these indicators, we have elements of quality, specific statements that describe the situation on ground. For instance, if we are talking about how effective are they as an element of quality, we ask, first of all, we try to ascertain, are they actually monitoring anyway, or are they coming around? Yes or no? And if they are monitoring or coming around, on a scale, we have a scale on 1 to 5. How well do you place their monitoring? And then they have to discuss among themselves based on their experience, based on what they've seen on ground, and then come up with a score for monitoring, which we feed into the effectiveness aspect or as effectiveness indicator. And then this is the indicator that we use in our analysis in the statistics.
Great. Thanks, Helen. There are a number of questions for you, so I'll come back to them. Let me just go to Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, is there any economic value or potential to cultivating non-fruit trees? And are there any accessible markets for these non-fruit trees?
Yes, Patricia, thank you very much for the question, which is a great one. And the short answer is yes, there are also for non-fruit trees huge potential. If you look at the current timber trees which are being harvested, like rosewood, a lot of cutovers could be used for floor panels, for example. The total rosewood market in China alone is 15 billion US dollar. So there's a huge potential if done sustainably and in a managed forest setup.
Great. Thank you so much. This next question is for Gillian. So Gillian, the policies that Zambia have are good, as said, but the application of this policy is not good. What suggestions or recommendations do you have to ensure that these policies are implemented accordingly?
Thank you for that question. I think in my presentation, in our findings, perhaps what we could point out to is the participation at local level. If people buy into those policies, then they will also be able to ensure that they're implemented. What we see, especially for forest resources, which is where our study was centered, is that there's more or less like a war between the people that want to use the resource and those that are managing it. So if that kind of relationship continues, then we'll not see these policies translate into anything that is going to ensure that our forests are protected. But when forests are protected, I think people should see the objective for which it is being done and that it is for their own good. That way, we could see also that the policies are implemented. As they stand, yes, they are good. There's very little financing to ensure that we have people that are capacitated to translating these policies into work. But the fact that also there's very little representation of staff on the ground may be contributing to the non-operationalization of these policies. There's that disjoint between the people that understand the policies very well, the people that also try to translate international treaties into local and integrate them into our policies, and the people that are supposed to be benefiting from the resource that we want to apply these policies. So I think there's need to have that integration between the policymakers, policy implementers, and those that are supposed to be benefiting from the resource itself, would be my comment.
Good, thank you. Thanks for those recommendations. The next question is for Chona. So Chona, how is eco charcoal competing with normal charcoal for the market?
I can comfortably say that it's competing favorably because our big bag, I'll stick to the big bag because most of the normal charcoal is sold in the very big bag. Our big bag as well is still under 150 kwacha, which is almost the same as the price of the big bags at local market. So I would comfortably say that it's competing favorably at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Another round. So back to Helen. Helen, was there any specific finding that you did not expect to find in the forest governance study? Did there anything unusual pop up that you'd like to share?
Of course, if I go back to the research question, because we know that there are so many governance indicators, forest governance indicators that have been recommended. The fact that we're able to even identify the specific aspects, at least the specific indicators that are addressing with potential to address deforestation, I think this is, first of all, this is very interesting, but also to know that in Zambia, for instance, that with all the different indicators that we have for governance, very few of them have the, for now, because of the very weak governance structure, they don't seem to address deforestation. So as much as it's being emphasized that, you know, we need forest governance, we need forest governance. Right now, with the current situation, we cannot effectively address deforestation because of the thresholds are very low. We need to go past a certain threshold of governance quality before we can effectively address deforestation. I think this is also very interesting. And also to know that our traditional system, as much as we are promoting our customary system, they have potential to excavate deforestation. So I think this is also very interesting and very surprising because when you look at the legislation, when you look at the policy, these are very fundamental governance structures for addressing deforestation in Zambia. But if they seem to excavate deforestation, I find that this is very surprising result, at least for the context of Zambia. And this is why we recommend that, yes, they are powerful, they are very fundamental, but they have to be supported, especially with land use planning, so that they plan for the land resources efficiently, and to ensure that they have places where people can farm, but also to ensure that we have a certain part of a forest that is conserved in Zambia.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, I think that that customary interface is very interesting because there's been an assumption that they would perform better in terms of management. So I think that was some interesting finding as well on that end. The next question is for Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, you just mentioned rosewood as a potential non-fruit tree as the market is huge in China. But how long will it take for a rosewood tree to grow to maturity and be marketable? Most likely too long for people to wait for it. I guess this is a comment. I don't know what maybe you could respond to that comment.
Yes, Sandra, thank you very much for the question, and a very valid one. And for us, it's at Plant a Million, it's a two-tier approach. One, the existing standing stock of rosewood has to be harvested sustainably. And what is happening today is that farmers, village people are not realizing that each of those trees is worth $1,000 plus. And at the moment, there are international companies coming in and paying them 50 kwacha for each log they're taking out. So it has to start on that level. strategically harvested rosewood plantations, which exist today, so that selective trees are cut with the right amount. And the second part is then the replenishing of those areas, so making sure that the farmers, the community members understand, yes, I'm cutting out high value trees for school fees or health purposes today, but for my children in the future to be able to do the same, a replenishing, a replanting of those trees has to start. And typically the maturity, depending on the end product of rosewood and the diameter size you need, is somewhere between 10 to 20 years. So typically, if it's for furniture, you're looking at a 20-year time period. But again, it's here having the long-term view for the children and the next generation, which community members have to understand and make sure that, that's the pathway going forward.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you. Next question is for Chaona. So Chaona, in the absence of miyombo trees, which other trees can be used to produce eco charcoal?
With Miombo taking over almost 60-70% of our vegetation, if you look at the vegetation map of Zambia, majority of our country is Miombo, and that's what makes it a suitable candidate, in addition, of course, to its regeneration power. But it's hard to say off the top of my head what other species you can use, depending on which geographic region of Zambia you're in. It will probably vary. But one of the most important aspects that we have to keep in mind is that, for example, the very hardwood trees like the mopanis would take much longer to burn. So the carbonization efficiency effort, and then trees that have high moisture content as well would defeat the whole purpose of trying to produce it with efficient carbonization. So I can't say off of the top of my head what species you can use alternatively. I would need a bit more information about which area and what species are there, and then you can see what alternatives can be used. But eco charcoal is not in the name of the tree species used, but in the name of the process and the approach taken to producing that charcoal. That's why I'm emphasizing on geographic zones and alternative tree species.
Great. Thanks, Chaona. I guess this is a kind of a loaded question, so anyone can dive in. So with implementation of policies, don't you think we need more people on the ground to help sensitize the community and help them get involved? Gillian, I know you spoke a bit about that. And are there any arrangements being made to employ more foresters and conservationists? Because we can have such wonderful presentations, and if nothing is done about it, then we are still at loss. I know that most people who have studied conservation and similar programs are working for other companies that have nothing to do with conservation. This is quite a big question. Maybe a few of you could chip in how we address this. Please go ahead.
I'm happy to start. I think
Chaona and then Emmanuel.
Okay, so I think while we need more foresters and more conservationists, at the end of the day, the number of these people will not be equivalent to the number of local communities we have on the ground. So one of the approaches that I think would be most efficient would be the first part of the question, which is talking about sensitization and awareness raising. And this is in an effort to get communities to have more ownership towards the natural resources that they're getting. But then again, a human being is seldomly going to value something that is not directly beneficial to them. And that's where the legislation bit comes in handy, because I think the forestry department has made some effort to make the legislation a bit more enabling for community benefits. So we have the SI 11 of 2018, which supports community forest management. And one thing that needs to be done now is domestication of that SI at community levels, because what this SI does is it allows communities to form community forest management groups, which then take up ownership of community forest management. That's community forests, not the national or local forest. And under that SI, the community can actually declare if they want to. For example, the ones we've partnered with are trading in carbon offsets. So then they have those benefits directly attached to whether or not the forest is still standing. And that increases the amount of value that they place on that particular forest. So having more conservationists and more foresters on its own is not the answer, because this particular stool has more than one leg. So we actually need to have several legs to the stool, and that's the SI that we have is one of the legs to that stool, in addition to more foresters and conservationists to domesticate the legislation to the local community.
Great, thanks, Chona. Emmanuel?
Two main comments. The first one on the forestry department, and with at Plant a Million, we're working quite close with them. If you realize that we have 3 budgeted foresters per district, we're talking of only 3 people for huge areas, districts being thousands and thousands of hectares in size. So clearly, in terms of how many hectares can one person monitor and supervise, 3 forest officers per district is by far too little. We should be talking about 300 per district and not 3 per district. So there's a clear gap, as in a number of people we actually need to manage our forests sustainably and with the right manpower. The second aspect is on the education of the value of trees. If you look at Mukula, which was in the last years in the media, people in the rural areas did not realize that the person buying from them at 50 kwacha per log or per meter was making thousands of dollars. So there's a clear exploitation of the communities who are not aware of the value of trees. So we at Plant a Million try to preach and clearly make sure community members understand how much does a tree value on the market, and to stop this agreeing of community members of depleting of their resources at very, very, very low cost. And at the end, staying there with a deforested, degraded land, which the next generation will be suffering with.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Any sentiments from Helen or Gillian?
I can just add, I think we need to just understand that there's very little investment in the forestry sector, which is detrimental to management, because they're the ones who are mandated to manage these forests so far. So there are very few non-governmental organizations, for example, in Zambia, that are interested in areas where we went to undertake our study. You can go in provinces and find maybe there's only one, and they have a very small portion of whatever activities they have to do. So we need so many players in this sector to help to ensure that these forests are actually protected. But we cannot run away from the fact that the starting point is to invest in the forestry sector. The fact that we do have the forestry sector, which is mandated to manage these forest resources, is a starting point. The government has to take an interest. Emmanuel is giving an example of how local communities only realize that they had this valuable resource that they could have used. But isn't it up to us as technical people to share with them? This is why I was actually trying to link forest governance even to international treaties. If we are exposed and we know what it takes to ensure that we have good governance of forest resources, and then we are not communicating, we are not passing on this information to the ground, to the roots, then it's quite difficult. Look at even the example that Chaona is using for production of eco charcoal. They are only in a certain area. People don't know that they can actually go this route. So are there technical people to help the local communities to ensure that this information is passed to them and that there are these options. If people can go move away from charcoal production, which currently I know people say it's politically motivated, but people are looking for livelihoods. How can we demonstrate that there are more livelihoods from forests other than just through charcoal production? Who is benefiting even to this carbon trading? It's us that are already informed, but we would like to see that this carbon trading, translates into incomes at local level. How can we do that? It's these policies that should actually help us. We have policies, and we have always said Zambian policies are good. How do we actually ensure that we practically translate these policies into something that is going to help to improve the livelihoods of those local communities in the rural areas who are now just using the forest in the manner that they feel like, because they have to put food on their tables. So it's important that we, maybe, how can I put it, push government to put aside resources, because I think that's the starting point. If government doesn't put in even a coin, how will the private sector be interested? I think it is key that we start from first the government putting resources. It's not enough to have 3,000 kwacha as operational funds at district level per month. What would you do with 3,000 kwacha? Maybe buy airtime. This is the money that we know reaches districts in the forestry sector for management. Where would it take them? I think it's key that we support these sectors to ensure that they have resources to manage these forests. I mean, even the amount of research that we do.
Julian, sorry, Julian, I'm gonna.
Quick point.
The research. I gotta step in.
Is only supported externally. Sorry. So
thank you.
Let's also invest in research as a country, not point just to externally depend on external funding. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, we're running behind time. We took a little bit longer. I'm going to close the session. I know there's some really good discussions, but I'd like to give folks a little bit of time. I know folks have got hard stops. So thank you very much to all the presenters. I think we've had another lively discussions on forests and the challenges of forest management, and especially governance has come up a lot in this session. Yesterday, there was a broader discussion around biodiversity and some wildlife aspects. I think today's brought it into a stronger, narrow focus on forestry. A few summing points, I think, before I close. I think in Zambia, we are really at a critical place with our forests, as the presenters have shown us, our forest resources. We've got a policy in place, but there's huge threats that are really hitting our forest resources. The ag piece and the charcoal piece as drivers, I think, are critical. They're huge drivers. And so we are faced with how do we address these big drivers? And again, as I shared yesterday, we cannot use, it can't be business as usual. We can't use the same way we managed 20, 30 years ago to address the challenges that we have now. The rate of deforestation is very high. And so with a policy in place, I think Zambia is in a really good place. It's devolved the forest management landscape and has opened up space for more players. It's not just government, it could be NGOs and it can be private sector, as we've heard today. So a few questions and a few thoughts to think about. How could we really enhance this innovative space now that we have to increase more partners and players? So how do we really accelerate the role communities can play in managing the resources? Could we think about putting our community forest management program on steroids? Let's get that in the same way we did with wildlife and really get communities to be players, to really participate and see the value of being managers and stewards of forests. Could we really bring in the private sector, the value of sustainably managing our forests, the private sector bringing new thinking and new ideas? And then how do we think of strengthening the capacity of our government staff who are on the front lines? As we heard, the numbers are low. Where could we begin to think about places where we kind of share roles and responsibilities in managing these landscapes at an integrated level. And so it'll be good to start thinking and opening up in that space. And how do we begin to leapfrog? Instead of, I mean, how do we get to change for our forest resources in 10, 20, 30 years when we are seeing that degradation at a very fast rate? So it'll be a lot of outside the box thinking. It'll be a lot of collaboration that's needed. I think what started here is important. I think there should be more opportunities to collaborate as stakeholders. I think we could look forward to the next symposium, just hear about kind of where we're getting in terms of putting the forest policies in place, what it is looking like in practice. So I just want to say, to end here and say thank you to USAID and the ILRG project for hosting this really great symposium. Thank you to the presenters. Thanks for your time. I know everybody's busy. And thank you for all the participants. Thank you for your question and for being with us these last 2 days. I wish everybody well, keep safe, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Bye, Patricia.
Also, thanks to Alex in Colombo for the great work and organization.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. Thank you all for joining.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.